Sup, everyone? I recently had a wide-ranging discussion with Victor Bruzzone from the Pill Pod after reading his introductory article entitled Liberalism and its Discontent and Matt McManus' book on a critical socio-legal examination of liberalism with Palgrave Macmillan, published in 2020. Needless to be said, Victor and I had a pretty good laugh recording our conversation in light of Francis Fukuyama releasing his most recent book by the same title this past week. Though published by an academic press and rather pricey, I highly recommend people give it a read, especially if you've been following the rise of the new right and postmodern conservatism developed through the work of Michael Brooks and McManus. In any event, I hope you all enjoy the convo, along with discussing Matt McManus' book on a critical, legal, and capability-based approach to liberalism. We also talk about how the Pill Pod got started, some differences between left-wing and right-wing versions of communitarianism, Michael Brooks' interest in integral theory and cosmopolitanism, humanistic and existential psychology, the role of religion in the public sphere, and finally, Canada's contribution to philosophy and political theories, evolving ideas of cosmopolitanism. So let me know what you guys all think, and I hope you're all doing well. Cheers. All right, rock and roll. Well, Vic, thanks a lot for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Happy
It's
to be
good
here,
to meet you a bit in person as well.
Well, yeah,
Just
as
like
much
we were
as
just
this
discussing.
yeah, as much as this can count as in person. But yeah, no, I mean, obviously you were like one of our early supporters. I feel like you must have been were you like one of our first patrons? I mean, I know you're not anymore, but I feel like you must have been like one of our first.
Oh, probably. I mean, I guess once you guys launched a Discord, but I mean, obviously, I've been following all of your work pretty closely for quite some time now. And I guess what I'm super excited about is to kind of go out and try and figure out, I guess, the chronology of how you guys came together as a crew and how it culminated in this book with Matt, obviously. Because the essay, that you wrote in terms of the introduction, in terms of his book, is just fantastic. I mean,
I'm glad you enjoyed.
Yeah, I've been following his I guess his writing and kind of development kind of I guess kind of since he graduated and developing as a writer. So his work has just spoken to me on so many different levels. And this essay that you wrote for his most recent, well, one of his most recent works
Yeah,
has
that guy,
just been
that
amazing.
guy's level of productivity is superhuman. I don't know how he does it. He's like writing like 20 essays, I feel like, a month. I feel like he has a new think piece out, and then he's like reviewing all these conservative books too. Like he's reviewing any new dumb conservative book that comes out, whether it's Ben Shapiro or whatever. It's like Matt's going to be writing a review for it, and it's just, I don't know how he pumps out so many things all the time. And then meanwhile, he's on his like fifth or sixth book. It's crazy. I don't know how he does it.
No, I mean, the man can write faster than I can read.
Yeah.
It's
And I think
amazing.
part of it is actually the fact that he reads so fast. Like I've been with him when he's like, okay, like, yeah, I'm just going to read. And then he'll be like done a book, like an academic book, in like a week.
Yeah.
Like he read like Dugan's book, like recently, like, which is I think a giant tome. And then he read like Millerman's book too about Dugan, and he digested that in like a week. Yeah, the guy is a machine.
No, he is. He really is. I mean, but his writing has just spoken to me on so many different levels. And so did your essay, because my academic background is actually in religious studies. So you picked up on I guess a lot of things, or highlighted some aspects, in terms of that I've been feeling and been thinking about tremendously, kind of reading Matt's work, because obviously he's coming at much more from a critical legal perspective, which is completely out of the scope of my own kind of academic background. But I mean, it's been a real journey for me in terms of my ongoing sort of understanding of politics and the legal jurisdictions and stuff like that, in terms of how it works in terms of international politics and stuff like that. So it's been fascinating. And I really felt kind of the flavor, I guess, of your kind of philosophy background, because you have an MA in philosophy as well, if I understand correctly. Right?
Correct. Yeah, correct. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I remember when Matt asked me to write the introduction to this book, I was like, I don't know. Matt is like so generous with his friends when it comes to like, oh, write an essay in my edited volume, like write the introduction for my book. And I remember being kind of like unsure about what exactly write. And I think, but I think this kind of problem that I think, because you mentioned you come from a religious background, and excuse me, for the listeners, I think really like what I argue in this introduction, which I hadn't read in a while, but really I kind of put my finger on like the ways in which liberalism and liberal neutrality, I guess, can be sort of unappealing or feel kind of alienating or feel kind of inhuman, or like it doesn't really capture like a sense of community or a sense of meaning in life, right? And I guess like that's probably, I'm guessing, where like your religious background, I guess it spoke to you in that sense. And that was just something that I was interested in at the time. I actually don't come from a religious background at all, and in fact I like liberal neutrality. Like I like the alienation of it, like I actually appreciate it. But what I realized is that like that's not the case for everybody. Like I'm a total cosmopolitan. Like I have no attachment to like culture, like to some specificity of culture. Like I don't care at all about any of that stuff. But I recognize that a lot of people do. And I think that liberalism, if it's going to be appealing, if it's going to win people over, I think that it needs to have some way of talking about it. And I think to some extent what Matt was doing in the book was kind of trying to find a way of talking about it through his idea of dignified self-authorship. Although I will say that, like, I don't know if it came through in my introduction, but in some ways, like, I'm most skeptical about how successful it actually is.
Totally. Yeah, that's why I'm so excited to talk to you about it, because I mean, to me it as well, I'm not sure if it goes up and beyond liberalism to go out and answer, a lot of the questions that people have, and some of, kind of the reactionary responses we're seeing on the left and the right as well, that you both kind of develop and
exactly. Exactly.
Really,
that's
really
one of
well.
the things I think I talk about in the introduction, is the fact that there's actually, it's not just the right wing, although the right wing is kind of a new development of right wing anti-liberalism, right? With Matt and I have been talking about this for a while. And in fact, on our last interview with Greg Sargent from the Washington Post, we talked about the new right, and how a lot of the new right is kind of it has all these sort of critiques of liberalism, right? That it like destroys community, destroys kind of meaning structures. But then they're starting to kind of also realize that part of that destroying meaning structures comes from the economic side of liberalism too, right? So like that's why we're seeing the Patrick Deneen's, and I think maybe some of the who's the other guy, the Sohrab Amari. I think like they're kind of, there's this new flavor of like a right wing reactionary that is kind of like left wing on economic issues, but very right wing on social and meaning issues. And I think that makes sense from the perspective of criticizing liberalism. I can see why that's happening, because finally I guess some conservatives are realizing, oh, like the economic part of the liberalism is maybe also part of the problem that's destroying these meaning structures that I value so much. But yes, of course, on the left, that's been a long-standing critique, the economic side, and to some extent the culture side. I think I mentioned the communitarians on the left have a long history of sort of identifying the atomization of liberalism, that everyone's treated as this atomized individual, and that like we need to cultivate some kind of civic culture, some kind of community culture that is going to, like, I guess, necessary for the conditions of justice, I suppose.
No, and I mean that's, I guess, because in terms of my academic background in religious studies, I mean most of the authors and thinkers that I was exposed to are much more along communitarian sort of lines. Like one of the biggest ones, I guess, that had a big impact on me is Robert Bella. But very much like Charles Taylor, he's quasi-communitarian, but, very much to the left. He's not very much to the right in a certain way. But being exposed to Matt's writing, I mean, he really smashed that for me pretty hard when I start to get into some of his reading, because I wasn't that well-versed, as well-versed, I would say, in the philosophical liberal tradition. And because of studies, sociology and anthropology, and and basically how they went out and deconstructed what religion really is, I just got exposed a lot more to that. So I appreciated that too there, in terms of how you brought that up in the piece, and how you veer into the existential kind of questions, right? Is this self-authorship type of framework that he's developing, is it enough to go out and kind of I guess feed people's existential questions, but also larger questions of meaning that you highlight there too?
Yeah, no, totally. I think it's I mean, I haven't revisited Matt's precise argument in a while, but yeah, I mean in some ways I know he borrowed a lot from people like Martha Nussbaum and like, I guess what they call the capabilities approach to liberalism, right? Which is like about the capacities that people have to fulfill, to like carry out the life of their choosing. And I think like dignified self-authorship is in a way like a species of that, where it's this idea that like liberalism, like any form of kind of like political economic liberalism, needs to also contain within it the conditions that allow people to flourish in some sense. And like, you know, and I think that question of flourishing is important. And I think that that's you know, something that concerns me as someone who's totally like not religious. You know, both my parents were atheists, I think I mentioned. Never really cared about that stuff, always thought religion was silly. But I think, but you know, more and more I think as I've gotten older and matured, you know, I think I realized that where I think dignified self-authorship is right, and where I also think it overlaps maybe with why some people like religion or like some kind of like commitment to community, is that I think when you get older, you realize that like all the things in life that are worth doing like require a kind of level of commitment and discipline to in your own life. And I think that people you realize that like the real satisfaction that you get from like achieving something is that you've like thrown yourself into something and pushed yourself to overcome. And I think that like, you know, the good parts of religion are the fact that that like they invite you to commit yourself to something in a really deep way, and sometimes there's an aspect of discipline to that. And I think like discipline is actually like, you know, self-discipline. But of course, I think the problem with religion, for me at least, is that it ends up being like a discipline that comes from the outside. That's not necessarily the case. Like, you know, I understand, you know, if you can take like a Kierkegaardian approach to it or something like that, right? And it's like you are taking it up, right? Like very deliberately yourself, right? And I think like that's where it can be really powerful. So I think like that this is, I guess, the kind of existential question, right? It's like what are the conditions where you really feel like you're flourishing, right? And I think that like a big part of flourishing is when you put yourself in a situation where you feel like you're throwing yourself into something, and that requires discipline and effort, and there's like an upshot to it. And I think like, you know, I think Matt's trying to find a way of expressing that in liberalism through dignified self-authorship. And I think religion tries to do that. But then I think where liberalism and sometimes ends up missing the mark, and this is me just kind of spitballing here in the moment, is that because there's no because you can just choose to do it however way you want, people feel disoriented because they're like, okay, well, where am I going to find that flourishing? Because it's like no one's telling me where to go. It's just I have to figure it out myself. And I think that can lead to tremendous amounts of existential dread, because you're like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. But then on like the more traditional religious side, the bigger problem, which is the thing that liberalism came in, is the fact that sometimes it can feel arbitrary, right? Because you're just like, well, I don't know if I believe in doing it that way, right? You have all these messages externally. So rather than having to find it internally and be like disoriented, you have what can be like an oppressive structure that can feel arbitrary. And I know from my own experience, one of the things that I was always allergic to growing up, and I was a bad student in high school and stuff like that, is because I just hated things that felt arbitrary. I hated things that I was like, well, why am I going to do that? I don't care about that. Why are you forcing me to do my homework that I don't care about? And then for me, like when I got to grad school, I just found something that felt it was worthwhile to discipline myself and push myself to do it. And then, so anyway, all that kind of rant to say is that I think like whatever the answer, insofar as there can be an answer, which, you know, I'm skeptical about, it's like finding some middle ground between like it being arbitrary, but then also providing you some direction for how to like, you know, find that flourishing or self-authorship.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, there's just so much bad religion out there, right? I mean, there's no way escaping that. And the confluence between religion and culture as well are really kind of overlapping lines that, you know, kind of like the communitarian sort of critique, liberalism's critique of communitarianism, it can be extremely oppressive and authoritarian on a certain level, which is something I was not that particularly sensitive to till I discovered Matt's work, since I was coming very much from, you know, kind of a Charles Taylor sort of based approach. Although, you know, he doesn't come across like that, but I never really thought about, well, somebody like McIntyre, obviously, you know, I can go and see how that would come across as much more authoritarian. And
I'm curious, what's your what is like your kind of like background when it comes to like religion, if you don't mind me asking, like in your own life and stuff like that, like
but I mean,
how
kind
did
of
you
like
find
you,
like Taylor
well, because
and philosophy in general?
well, I mean, I was a horrible student as well, basically in high school and moving into it. But I mean, I just developed a deep sense of learning, well, a love of reading and learning through my parents in a certain way. But I mean, I grew up in Quebec. I'm a French Canadian. So, I mean, in terms of everything that has to go and do with religion is just so unbelievably toxic. But in '83, my brother passed away. He died of leukemia. So it was a really shocking sort of event that hit our family. You know, obviously me and my mother and everybody around us to, you know, to go and witness, obviously, you know, a child. My brother, you know, he was not even 8 years old when he passed away of leukemia. So it was just a shattering sort of, I mean, it just shattered our worldview, right? And then obviously our religion of the past was not going to go make any sense. I mean, it was very, you know, if you sit down with my parents, talk to them about Catholicism, they'll go out and climb up the wall. But my dad had a sufficient, I guess, kind of background in educational, like he started off as a gym teacher and then he did his MA in counseling psychology. So when my brother got ill, he was almost at the tail end of his MA in counseling psychology. So he had, you know, some stuff to fall back onto. So, you know, stuff around existential psychology. And then obviously, you know, that came in and informed a lot of the stuff that I saw around the house, but also, I guess, East Asian sort of traditions and religions as well.
Does he take the existential approach?
Yeah.
That's cool. I'm a big fan of Irvin Yalom, if you know who that is.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I've read a few of his books. Like I love the guy. I love his work and his approach to life. So that's cool.
Yeah. No, so he was, you know, through and through a sort of humanistic and existential psychologist in terms of his kind of formation and background. But even then, I mean, that wasn't enough to really go out and weather the storm, you know, in terms of what happened to us as a family in a certain way. So that was kind of the context that I grew up in, kind of to go and whatever. So once I, you know, became a teenager, I started to read a lot of that literature and I got really engrossed in that. And then eventually I decided to go back to university as a mature adult. I went back at 23. So I took a few years off CEGEP and then I launched myself into religious studies.
I think I went back to university at the same age too.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, because I also didn't go to university right after high school because like I said, I had terrible grades. So like I just was languishing. I did like a college diploma and then I like worked for a little while in like retail and stuff and like didn't really know what I was doing. I think I tried to be like a salesperson. That was the worst. Like I worked in an office and then I think I was either 22 or 23. I feel like I was 23, maybe 22 when I went back to Carleton, because Carleton lets you enter as like a special student where you take like 2 courses. And then depending on how you do in those, then they'll like maybe admit you full time. Right. Okay. Which is what happened. So yeah.
Cool. And I guess that's kind of my question to you too, is, I mean, because you and Matt both went at Carleton. So is that where you guys became buddies and started to?
No, not at all. So yeah. So like the story of the pill pod is really, I guess it really actually starts.
But you did Carleton?
I didn't know Matt. I didn't know Matt until, so I did Carleton, then I did Ryerson for an MA. Okay. And then I went to York to do another master's in urban planning because I was always interested in urban issues. That was like my other kind of, I mean, I did political science in my undergrad too, but it wasn't quite a double major. But even since I was a kid, I was really I liked cities and urbanism. So I was like, okay, well, maybe the academia path isn't for me. Maybe that's, so let me just get like a practical degree. I'll get a master's in urban planning. I can still maybe study some stuff that interests me, and then I'll just get a job as a planner and I'll be like a bureaucrat or something. And I did that. And like, it was a good experience. And actually, it was too woke though. I mean, the environmental studies department at York, this was like even before like wokeness was really a term, but I remember, I can tell you a little like a story about that if you're curious, but I'll set that aside for now.
Well, so I was my experience of not wanting to go and move on to graduate studies is essentially all around that as well.
That's fine. Yeah, I know.
I had really bad experiences around, I guess, because I finished in 2013, and at that point I needed to go out and decide, but I was just looking at graduate schools and thinking around in terms of how you go out and find somebody to go out and supervise you and everything else within that kind of environment at the time. I was just thought there's no way in hell I won't survive.
Well, I mean, I think, I will say that I think philosophy departments even now are somewhat protected from it. Like, because the problem is that like all that rhetoric about like, well, this isn't up for debate, right? Like, that like kind of like woke rhetoric about like that just doesn't work in philosophy department, because philosophy by its nature, everything is up for debate. Like, right. You can argue, there's people who say that consciousness isn't real, right? That like, that qualia is an illusion. So it's like, and that is like fundamental to our identity. So like, how can you say that that's up for debate, but you can't debate like any other like trans issues or trans ontology? Like, yes, it's like still going to be a little bit edgy to do that, but I'm just saying, like in philosophy, like I think if you pursuing graduate studies in philosophy in most places, it's like a lot of that annoying woke rhetoric just doesn't work there, because it can't, because it's like it would go against what it is. But anyway, so yeah, so the pill pod, just to kind of tell that story, like so when I was at Ryerson, there was a dude who was the year above me, Kirk Longheed, who's actually a professor in like, I want to say Lithuania now, and he was like a continental, no, sorry, he's not a continental philosopher. He's like an analytic philosopher of religion. And he was just a really cool guy. And we used to go drinking. I remember that we spent this summer, I think it was like the summer between either Ryerson and New York, or maybe it was my first summer. I can't remember which summer it was, but him and I were just hanging out all the time. We were just like drinking. And he was friends with pills independently.
Okay.
And then when I went to York, he was like, oh, like my friend is doing his PhD here. You should like hang out with him. And I think I'd met him like once or twice. I think I might have like gone to a party or something. And then so like I was like living up at York in the graduate residence, and like I had friends in Toronto, but I didn't really like know anyone at York. And like, yeah, I had a couple of friends in my program, but I mentioned before, it was like a pretty woke environment. And there was also like a lot of people who didn't care about philosophy, who just wanted to be planners, right, and get their diplomas. Not that I need my friends to be interested in philosophy. In fact, most of my friends don't give a shit. But I just like was like, I wanted people to drink with and talk about ideas, right, when I'm at this university. So I reached out, and then one day he was like, yeah, like we're going to be at this campus bar, the Absinthe Cafe, which is a great campus hole in the wall. So I just showed up and started hanging out. And then one of the other guys was Erik, who's friends with him. And Matt was another guy who I actually didn't really meet for a while, but he was also friends with him. And eventually, like, it was a slow process, but like I got introduced to Matt, and I got introduced to these other people. And we were really just like drinking buddies at York. And then it was like, and we would like occasionally, and there's actually a long time where we like kind of I wouldn't say we like lost contact exactly, but it was one of those things where, you know, it's like that friend that you would like maybe meet for a drink like once every 6 months, you know, it's like, don't see them that often. But then one day he just called me and he's like, hey man, like I'm making this YouTube videos, or I think I'd seen some of his YouTube videos. I'm thinking about doing a podcast, and like, these are the people who, and I feel like you'd be good on it too. And I was like, sure, why not? Give it a try. Let's do it. And then like, Matt wasn't actually in it initially. It was like another dude from New York. If you go back and listen to some of our really early episodes, you'll see that there's someone
Chris
else.
was there as well. I mean, I remember
Chris was on a few episodes.
Yeah.
But he wasn't actually. There's another guy who's like a Lacanian who was in like the first couple episodes. And then he left. Okay. And we were looking for someone else. And I was like, oh, we should bring Matt McManus in. Like, he's like writing online all these articles all the time. He has like a pretty big Twitter following. And secretly I was like, oh, he'll be like my political ally. Like, I want him, I want him in, you know. That's what I was thinking, because I knew that Matt and I like were really close on like politics, and in terms of thinking, like, we're both friendly to continental philosophy, but also like the philosophical liberalism. It's like we're both kind of like a weird combination. I would say that combination isn't usually that common. So I just wanted him in, and I just thought that way we would have like two people who are like really like, you know, theory postmodernist types, I mean, not to reduce, Erik and Pills to postmodernism exactly, but they're much more like in that, like, oh, like, and then I was like, and then there'd be two of us who'd be like more, like liberal and political. And so, and then like he just had a following. So that's how it happened. And we brought him in. And even when he came into the podcast, I will say that like Matt and I weren't even like super close friends at that point. Like I just like seen him around, but we didn't talk regularly. Now I would say that Matt and I are like very good friends. I would consider him one of my best friends. We've cultivated like a great friendship. We talk like all the time. So I would say maybe another motive of bringing him in too was because not only did I think he would be an ally, but I was like, I like this guy. I want to be better friends with him. So, so it worked out, and that's basically like the origin story, and we've kind of gone from there.
No, I mean, it's been amazing to watch. I mean, the thing that I enjoyed the most about it is that you guys are Canadian as well.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Because like I'm constantly in a sea of American podcasts and thoughts, right, and things that are popping out.
Yeah, I always noticed that you appreciated when we would cover Canadian topics. I feel like I always remember you like either commenting or chiming in on like the episodes where it was like covering some Canadian issue. So I could tell that you appreciated that.
Yeah, no, and then I mean, to me, it's just a testament too of a new cohort of young scholars that are coming up, right? I mean, they're doing some amazing stuff, either online or in traditional sort of academic type settings, or just movers and shakers in terms of new thought there in terms of what's been coming up. I mean, that was the upshot that I had in terms of a bit of a conversation with Doug Lane to figure out, in terms of, because I'm a young Gen X, so I'm a bit older, I think, than most of you guys. But I'm younger than Doug. But there is this element of sort of millennial socialism that's been on the rise, right? There's this new level of consciousness, I think, that has been wrestling with, the context that we're swimming in. Which is, true. I mean, and some people are veering off, far to the right, and other people are moving more off to the left. And it seems to be this sort of battle of ideas, but also of kind of political wills here on some levels as well. So that's
funny. Millennial socialism. I like that. And then how would you characterize like the Gen Zers too? Because they're like a whole other, I feel like they're even more like, I don't know. I feel like they're very fractured. I know this because I'm kind of friends with Isocratic. He's like a Gen Z, guy.
Oh yeah.
You've seen him, and then like Mouthy Infidel, right? Who's like more on the streaming world. But man, that kid is super smart. I don't know if you've like consumed any of his content. We had him on once, and I think me and Matt went on, and he's just like 19 years old, but this kid is super smart.
Wow.
19, like really, like 19. He's thinking at the like I would say that he is probably like thinking at the level of like a master's philosophy student. He like makes videos that are like, he did like a 2-hour video like or like a defense of egalitarian justice, and he like reads G.A. Cohen and all these people. He's an impressive kid. But anyway, so like these are like some of the Gen Z. I've got my finger on the pulse of Gen Z a little bit, at least through these two guys.
Yeah. No, it's to me, it's been amazing to go out and watch. And I mean, like, again, back to the fact that you guys are from TO, and I mean, TO has always been an interesting hub for thinking. And even
did you used to live here or no?
No, I mean, born and raised in Montreal, but I mean, obviously because of Leo Panich up at York, and there's a few intellectuals that came through there very much on the left that are that have had somewhat of an impact on some of my thinking, I guess.
Yeah. So Matt and I grew up in Ottawa, although like I said, I didn't know him until I was in Toronto. And then Pills is actually from British Columbia originally, but he did his stuff. And then I think Erik is from Toronto, but I don't even know that actually.
Okay. But
I think he's from like Southern Ontario. Like I feel like he might be from like Oakville or like Burlington or one of those places, if you know where they are. I think that's where his parents
did you grow up in South America though? Because
my parents are from Chile, but I was born in Ottawa.
So you're born and raised in Ottawa. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean that's the other thing too, is I mean, like kind of like you said, in terms of the cosmopolitan sort of idea of culture, that for some people it either becomes a huge sort of rallying point for certain people, and for others it's not. I mean, that's the other thing too that I really enjoyed about your piece, is that because you clearly go out and differentiate that, right? And that there's I feel like you're highlighting some sort of danger there as well, that that if religion merges with culture, it could become unbelievably toxic in terms of how it can go out, and that's what the new right goes out and represents to me, and what Matt's been talking about in terms of postmodern conservatism. There's this deep sort of scary regressive sort of streak through it that I feel that can go off the rails on some certain levels.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah, like, and I guess what's interesting too about postmodern conservatism and like the new right is, well, I guess because, well, yeah, it's hard to put all these different traditions together, but yeah, I guess most of the new right, like post-liberalism, like Adrian Vermeule, I know he wrote that Common Good Constitutionalism book recently, right? And like the whole idea is, you want to appeal explicitly to like traditional values and traditional conceptions of the good that are going to be rooted in religion. I don't know. Yeah, and like, that just opens the door to like a bunch of scary stuff, I think. And I think Matt, I don't know if you read Matt's review of that book specifically, but he kind of touches on like how it just opens the door when you're going to like base like legal, well, and Adrian Vermeule is actually like a legal scholar, right? So like if you're gonna base legal decisions on like some idea of like the common good, but the common good being like, I guess, traditional moral values that most people like with their common sense would accept. Common sense, I guess, being based on some form of Judeo-Christian religiosity. Yeah, it opens the door to all kinds of like, I think, pretty crazy outcomes. But I think, yeah, I think that this is really a reaction to, our, I guess, postmodern condition of just being like, well, I don't know what, like, this doesn't seem to be working as well as we wanted it to. This doesn't seem to be giving us, I guess, it doesn't seem to be fulfilling the promise of modernity exactly. So yeah, I do feel like we're kind of at this point where people don't really know what to do next or what to fight for. I think we see it.
But even what they're fighting for is weird because, they don't obviously self-identify as postmodern conservatives. We tend to see them that way, which is kind of fun.
Well, I don't know. Well, here's the interesting thing is like, I was actually at the beginning of my last response, I was struggling there because I'm not sure if I would count some of this new right. Like, I don't know, I don't know if Matt would call like Adrian Vermeule, for example, postmodern conservatives because they are appealing to some traditional eternal values.
Yeah.
Right. But then like the postmodern conservative streak, I think, is more the Trump phenomenon, or like where there's kind of like this, I'll do whatever's necessary to just like win. And it doesn't matter if I'm like appealing to these traditional values because I just like, I'm going to do whatever's necessary. And it's going to be disconnected from any particularly coherent view of the world. So like that I don't know. It'd be interesting but I feel like Matt has probably said that some of these post-liberals are
it's kind not of clear though, exactly like you said clear. Though, because some of them are trads. They're literally, they're conservative trads in a certain way. And Catholic integralism is a weird ass type of worldview either which way. But in national conservatism, like if you follow Hazoni's kind of line of thought, like it's strange too because they're saying that they're for nationalism, yet it seems to be almost a quasi international national conservative movement, right? It's popping up in all these other countries across different continents. So is it really some form of just and that seems pretty modern in terms of interpretation of what, although he's using the Bible to go and unpack it in certain ways. But then you have guys like Douglas Murray, right, that are clearly conservative, but they're a new brand of conservatism, right? They're out and they're gay, and yet they're embracing some form of Christianity, although he doesn't go out and say he's a Christian. He says that he's some sort of cultural Christian, which is just some weird kind of like, and then obviously you have Trump. Trump is just some weird ass like phenomena. Like he's just he'll go out and do whatever the hell he wants whenever. And it's just really is this post-truth kind of
I was going to ask about Sorry, I was going to ask about the integralism, because I noted, like, because like your name on Twitter, like you adopt a different sense of integral, right? So
Yeah.
I was wanting to ask you about that, because like
Yeah.
integralism obviously has taken on a new meaning recently. But I
Yeah.
think like you were thinking, and I feel like I remember you talking about it in the Discord back in the day,
Yeah.
like integral philosophy, which is obviously not to be confused with Catholic integralism, right?
No, so yeah, no, exactly. No, and that's a bit of a joke too. That with well, because I guess somebody that might speak to you guys that came up in the Discord a few times is Matt Seagal,
Oh yeah,
who is
yeah.
the German idealist sort of scholar or in-house scholar up at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and well, that's what it is, right? It's that frame of integral sort of thinking. But the integral philosophy that grew around, I guess, California Institute of Integral Studies is influenced by a guy called Ken Wilber that maybe you've been seeing bounce around sort of on the intellectual dark web at times at various points and, and stuff like that. So there is, and Michael Brooks, that's what drew me into Michael Brooks' work because, well, when I discovered Matt's writing and stuff like that, I wasn't following everything that was going on very closely around Jacobin. And then once I start to go out and see some of the collaboration with Michael Brooks, I start to follow it a little more closely because I discovered that he grew up very much like me in a sort of humanistic, existential sort of progressive type of household, and that he eventually got exposed to Ken Wilber's integral theory and framework and writing as a kind of a young teenager, eventually moving into his young adulthood before he went into doing his degree in international relations. So that's gone out and informed my way of thinking. But obviously, when I went to university, I mean, you get slammed pretty hard with things you were reading as a teenager. So Ken Wilber was not welcomed in academia because he's not considered to be academic, right? Or he's perceived to go out and be very on the fringe of what academia is in New Age in a certain way because of his association with, organizations like the California Institute of Integral Studies. They're not.
Is that not accredited, like as a university, that place? Like,
no, it is. I mean, it's a legit, university and college and stuff like that you can go to. But I mean, it's an alternative college. It's not your standard, public college.
Yeah, that Nick's, is it Seagal or Chagall?
Matt Seagal, yeah.
Matt Seagal.
Exactly.
Matt Seagal. I feel like I was confusing him. Nick Chagall is someone else, I feel like.
Yeah. So his background is very much in German idealism.
Yeah,
and a lot of people that
I remember his old YouTube videos. Like I feel like he was making philosophy YouTube videos for like over 10 years, right? Like he's been doing like his musings on YouTube for a really long time. And he is like a little, he does come across like a little new agey, I remember, like sometimes, like some of his musings. So like and then I guess integral studies is like has like that I guess reputation or something.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, California Institute of Integral Studies was originally called the California Institute of East Asian Studies. So it started off as a religious sort of religious studies institute that was associated with Berkeley back in the day that attracted people like Alan Watts.
Cool.
1960s counterculture type of guys and stuff like that.
Nice.
So I mean, that's where I kind of got exposed to that kind of. So I mean, that's swimming around now in a lot of the stuff around the intellectual dark web, right? And I mean, obviously, Michael Brooks ended up at the Stoa. Ben Burgess now has been there as well. I've been kind of knocking the hope to see some of you guys eventually get picked up by either Rebel Wisdom or the Stoa to go on there and talk about postmodern conservatism, because it's so pertinent, I think, in terms of a worldview to go and understand in terms of our contemporary kind of moment right now.
Yeah, Matt should definitely be a guest on the Stoa. I sometimes check them out. Do you know the guy, or have you ever talked to that guy? What's his name?
Limberg. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, because it's quasi philosophy in a certain way, right? But I mean, Stoicism, the revival of Stoicism as a movement is weird.
Yeah, he has the Stoa. What I find interesting is like it seems like he'll just have anyone on who is this isn't like a critique. Like he'll just have anyone on who he thinks is kind of interesting or worth talking to. But I think he gets accused of being a reactionary, right? Because he's had a lot of reactionary people. Like, didn't he have like, I feel like, well, he had Millerman on, which whatever is fine. Matt and I tried to get him on because we wanted to, argue with him about Dukin, but
Okay, cool.
he very politely declined. We also, but like, he had that guy who's like a monarchist. What's his name on?
Oh yeah, he was just on Unheard as well there too. The guy who was associated with Peter Thiel. I can't remember.
Yeah, maybe. And like maybe he's also like considered to be in the same family as that dude on Nick Land, like the kind of dark enlightenment stuff or whatever.
Yeah.
Which I don't know that much about, yeah.
But that is a new phenomenon too, right? I mean, around with podcasts, or even shows like Michael Brooks, right? Through social media and, online kind of YouTube channels and stuff like that. There's this whole new media ecosystem that is quasi-academic on some levels. And on some levels, it's like pushing into all kinds of weird territory. I mean, you could go and smear it as being new agey, some of it maybe even, conspiracy type theory type stuff around the IDW type thinking. But I mean, there's still movements out there that people have been addressing, very much from the left. And I mean, Michael Brooks, I mean, that's another thing too. I mean, most of the pods that I've done is really to go out and pick people's brains in terms of, what they make about Michael Brooks' show, his legacy and his thinking and stuff like that. Because, one, my own personal interests around his thinking around cosmopolitanism, but also the fact that he was integrally informed with integral theory has been an interesting conversation for me to sit back and pick people's brains and stuff like that and try and make sense of it.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I didn't actually know that he was like interested in integral approaches. So yeah, like that's kind of news to me. And I know Matt's working on like a book about Michael Brooks too. I don't know if that's done or if that's coming out soon.
Yeah, he said it was in the pipe when we talked in terms of social, cosmopolitan socialism. So he's picking up on Michael's idea, which he kind of writes about in this most recent book as well, which is interesting too, because, I mean, I guess cosmopolitanism in a certain way has fallen on rough times too now. Right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think in some ways it's a bit of a dirty word, cosmopolitanism. And I think it gets a bad rep from both sides. I mean, maybe for the reason that like I even highlighted in this introduction, because I think cosmopolitanism can be associated with a kind of like species of liberal neutrality in like the bad sense, which is like, oh, well, like cosmopolitan, like there's no like particularity is irrelevant, right? Like particularity of culture, particularity of people, that shouldn't matter, right? Like what should matter is like everyone getting along. Let's like destroy difference, right? Like the kind of caricature of cosmopolitanism is like destroy difference, globalization. I think maybe it gets associated with globalization and maybe even like neoliberalism for the like uninformed in a way. I mean, there's a lot of versions of cosmopolitanism, obviously. And, and then it gets bunched up like on the right, people will associate it with that, their fears of like a world government and all that stuff. And then I said, like I said, on the left, I think just people associate it with that kind of like destruction of difference, destruction of particular cultures. And I think, so I think that for those reasons, people tend to be biased against the ideas of cosmopolitanism. And then also like maybe it gets associated with, in Canada, right, we have this multiculturalism idea, right, that we're so supposed to be so proud of, which always gets mercilessly critiqued as, being whatever, and not without merit, as kind of like a bumper sticker. Yeah, exactly.
Post-national sort of state, whatever that goes out.
Exactly. So it's kind of like a bumper sticker value of just like, multiculturalism. It's kind of like thin, it's shallow. It's not like there's no substance to it. It's just, so I think for all those reasons, people don't really like the idea of cosmopolitanism. And yeah, like, I think Michael Brooks was trying to locate and defend a version of it, trying to rescue the good in it. But I actually don't know. I haven't read Michael Brooks's book. against the web. So I'm not actually super familiar with like the precise conception of his argument, other than just what I've seen him talk about on YouTube videos when he was doing that.
Oh, you got to.
I know that what I heard
you
was
would
appealing.
love it, particularly
I'm sure I would.
with
I know I
some
would.
of the stuff that you guys have been talking about, and like in terms of against the IDW or Jordan Peterson and stuff like that.
Yeah, totally.
It's dead on in terms of a book. No, for
Yeah.
sure. No, and
Totally.
I guess this is the other thing too. I mean, so, because I mean, your background, since you say you kind of are, I mean, you kind of adhere to a sort of cosmopolitan worldview and stuff like that, or you're not that preoccupied, I guess, with culture. I mean, what do you make of Canada or Canada's role, I guess, right now in this kind of, context right now? What do you think? Because that was kind of a bit of the conversation I had too with Matt, is that I'm curious because, with the show that you guys are doing, you guys are Canadians. And I'm wondering, like how do you view Canada, and what do you think Canada's role should be like when we're interacting with some of these other actors on sort of the international scene and stuff like that? And does Canada have a sort of important critical role to play?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would say, so I want to pick up on one of the first things you said, which is just highlighting the fact that like I have kind of like a cosmopolitan worldview, and then I'll talk about Canada a little bit. And I want to kind of just clarify that I think I have I think I probably do have some kind of like not super thought out version of cosmopolitanism that probably matches up with what Michael Brooks argues for. But when I say like I feel cosmopolitan, it's more of like a dispositional attitude. It's like I just feel like I have a personality that is cosmopolitan, in the fact that like I don't feel any attachment like to any culture. Like I guess to some extent I feel attached to Canada because I'm used to it, but it's not because like, but I have no fixation on like anything like any Canadianness exactly. And like I certainly have no attachment to like my parents being from Chile. I mean, I like going back to Chile. I've been a few times. Like I like the food, and to some extent I like their attitude towards life. In other ways I don't like their attitude towards life. I think that Latin American countries, Chile specifically, it's a very low trust society, a low trust in institutions, low trust in their fellow citizens. So I don't like that part of it. But yeah, so like when I talk about my cosmopolitanism, it's really more of like a personality, right? So in some ways, the importance of that is that I'm not like committed to it in like exactly a philosophical sense, right? Like I understand that other people don't have that personality, right? Like I understand that it's like a personality that is particular to me, that I don't really have that many attachments. And in fact, I've speculated that part of the reason for that might be because when my parents moved here, I think my dad was just like, I just want us to be Canadian. Like, so I'm not going to hang around with like, I don't want all of our friends to be like other Latin Americans, right? Because, some people move to a new country and they kind of just stay in the diaspora, right? They stay. And like, so I never went to any, community centers or anything that were like Latin American. I never hung around with like, and I remember when I got one of my first job at a grocery store, there was this other guy who was Latin American too. I think he's from El Salvador. And he was like, "Oh, your parents are Chilean. Like, how come I've never seen you at like whatever? I guess there's like some Latin American community in the neighborhood." And I'm just like, "I don't know." And then I asked my parents, and that was when they told me. They're like, "Well, we just didn't want to be like pigeonholed to like whatever culture we're from, right?" So I think that's part of the reason I had no attachment to it. Yeah, and then in terms of just like Canada itself. Yeah, I mean, there's the question about like what I think of it on the world stage,
or even just vis-a-vis our southern neighbors.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, I think Canada is a weird place because we're basically like America, but like we also define ourselves as not being American, and I know that it's different in Quebec. Like you're from Montreal, so I think like Quebec is really like the only part of Canada that it actually feels like a different country. And I'm from Ottawa, right? So like I was right there on the border with Quebec, and I would go to Gatineau all the time, and like so I have more.
And Ottawa is pretty bilingual, as
It is pretty bilingual.
And
oh yeah, like in Ottawa. I mean, in Ottawa, just like being downtown, being in the market, being wherever, like chances are you're going to hear someone speaking French, like somewhere around, right? Like for sure. Whereas like in Toronto, I remember the first time I heard someone speaking French, I was like, oh wow, like I feel like, and then that actually made me realize how often I spoke French. I heard French in Ottawa because of how rarely. And actually, kind of like a funny aside, like as a total Anglo, although yeah, like I mean, my parents, I do have some Spanish because of my parents, but I'm pretty much an Anglo. And I remember when I first got on the subway, I was like, oh, wow, the announcements are only in English. And like, I will say guiltily, like afterwards, I was like, this is nice. Like only in English, I'm an asshole, but that's how I felt. I was just like, wow, it's like, and I was like, wow, Toronto really is like an Anglo city, right?
It's a real tension in the country. It's something that we face day in and day out. I mean, and even more so, I think, south of the border, right? Because if we do take ourselves, like as a, on the global scene, then we do need to go out and compete. And if you have to go out and compete in two languages, it's difficult. I mean, I could see why some Anglos would be like, fuck that. It's costing us money, or it's this or that, defund the CBC type nonsense that we're seeing, right?
Yeah.
Like, like why should we pay for the CBC and Radio Canada? Like, it just doesn't make any sense in terms of.
I mean, I will say though, like, even though I did have that feeling of like, oh, this is nice. And maybe this is a consequence of me, being from Ottawa, but like, I love that Quebec exists. I love that Quebec is in Canada. I love going there, and like, even though it's like annoying that I don't speak French, but like, I like it. I like that it's there. I have like nostalgia for it. I have nostalgia for it existing. I think I love talking to Quebecers because there's just like I like that Canada had to figure out a way for us to live together.
To fight off the Americans.
Well, yes, that's sure, to fight off the Americans, but even if the Americans weren't, I mean, that's a whole other conversation, I guess. But just like the fact that we're like, okay, well, we're all going to be the same country, but we have to figure out a way to like live together, and like the compromises. And I think that having Quebec is actually maybe like an under discussed reason for why Canada couldn't really create a single patriotic identity, because it's like, as soon as you try to put your thumb on being like, this is what Canada is, you're like, well, there's Quebec. So like, what do you mean that's what Canada is? So it's like, so it prevented, it like forced us to just like be kind of this weird kind of proto-cosmopolitan, like non-nationalist nationalism. And like multiculturalism, I think, as that sort of like bumper sticker Canadian idea, is really a consequence of having to be a bilingual, multicultural, well, bicultural, I guess at the beginning, country, that just like prevented us from being like, this is what it means to be Canadian. And I think in some ways that's a good thing. I mean, a lot of people, I like that. Some people don't like it.
When you really scratch it though, because I grew up in a very Pierre Trudeau, not Justin Trudeau sort of family. And I mean, when he decided to go out and run, I mean, the joke is that, he says, yeah, I would run for the Social Democrats, but we'll never win. So I'm running for the Liberals, and I'm going to try to go out and move everything to the left. Right. And he's smeared and hated for that in a certain way, but another way he's revered and loved for that. And even now, Justin Trudeau, when I think about it, right, I mean, hate him or love him, I mean, he's eating the NDP's lunch. Right.
Yeah.
He's eating it. Right. I mean, like, he's managed to go out because he is a progressive and he is far enough on the left that all of a sudden he makes, the Green Party and the NDP almost irrelevant in a certain way. And that's how he's managed to go out. And
although the NDP now will say that they're going to take credit for pushing him on like the childcare stuff. Right. And all that other stuff, which, I mean, I think it's probably true that he wouldn't have exactly done all of those things if it wasn't for needing the NDP support. But like you said, I think because of the fact that Justin Trudeau is actually like probably like has more progressive tendencies than your average liberal leader, he was probably pretty happy to be forced to do those things, right? Like in some ways,
I just love seeing not Justin, but Jordan Peterson's reaction to Trudeau. Like, if you want to see somebody get totally triggered and go off his rocker, and
my favorite are those episodes.
Just put a photo of Justin Trudeau up somewhere and see what happens to Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, the thing that is annoying about Justin Trudeau, though, probably, I don't even know if Jordan Peterson is mad about like those policies as much as he just hates all the lip service that that Justin Trudeau gives to like wokeness and identity politics, right? I think that's the thing that really gets under his skin. That's the thing that gets under my dad's skin too. I will say that like my dad is like otherwise fairly progressive, but for whatever reason, just like hates the like kind of woke rhetoric. And I think that there probably are a lot of people in the older generation who would otherwise agree with a lot of the policy proposals that Justin Trudeau wants to put in. But then when it comes to all the cultural stuff, the race stuff, the paying lip service, and like the kind of self-congratulatory ceremony of just being like, look how many like women and transgender and this and this and this and like all this talk. And I think it just like rubs a certain kind of older demographic person like the wrong way. And in some ways, like I kind of wish that he would cool it on that stuff, because I think that like it does alienate some people. And I think that I don't know it like what the strategic upshot is. Like I don't know how many people are actually voting for Justin Trudeau because he's saying all that like woke stuff. Like I feel like the really woke people like don't like him anyway, right? Like so I don't actually know if he's winning anyone over. Maybe it's just that people aren't like yelling at him for not doing it. Maybe it's like silences them, but I actually don't even understand what the political upshot is of like riding that horse so long is exactly.
Yeah. No, and I mean, to me, I mean, this is what I've been kind of contemplating. I've been to like, because if Trump does come back, or if something really goes off the rail south of the border, like, I mean, God forbid, I mean, some people are even talking civil war. I mean, if it does go to that kind of extreme and we have some sort of failed state south of our border, I mean, what would we do?
Yeah, I actually, I actually
like,
don't understand what's going to happen in the States. Actually, one of the questions we asked of Greg Sargent when we had him on was like, I actually asked him, people talk about civil war, but things are really bad. Like I was like, give me your like realistic worst case scenario, right? Like what's a worst case scenario that like doesn't seem super far-fetched to you? And the answer he had was just, I could see the Republicans actually stealing an election in the sense of just deciding to send their own electors, right? So like even if the Electoral College says one thing, if like that the state house is controlled by the Republicans, he's like, I could see them just sending their own electors anyway. And then if that happens, then you're going to see violence in the streets and stuff like that. But he was like, I don't know if that's going to lead to an all-out civil war, but like, a lot of civic and civil unrest, he says, seems plausible to him, pretty plausible to him, but still he's like somewhat far-fetched. And, to be fair, I don't think they're going to need to steal an election because I think they're just going to crush it anyway.
It could be.
So,
yeah, no, but I mean, my fear is just violence on some sort of level.
Yeah.
I mean,
so violence is definitely, I think, on the table.
Yeah.
Because if things keep going now, and then the Roe v. Wade like thing, which is probably going to be overturned, if it's an accurate draft opinion, and the likelihood of one of those justices flipping, I think, seems pretty low. So we're going to see Roe v. Wade overturned, and like, I mean, all this stuff is just stoking the fires of civil unrest. So
Yeah.
it's not going to be pretty. And then we're going to see the Republicans, if they control the House, they're probably going to try to pass an abortion ban, right? So like once Roe v. Wade is overturned, it's supposed to be at the state level for each state to decide their abortion laws. But I could see them trying to push an all-out national ban on abortions, and probably removing the filibuster to do that. So I mean, there's all these. I mean, things are just not looking good,
No.
like at all.
No, it's wild. No, it's when I think about it in terms of that. But I mean, it's just got me thinking much more, in terms of, because I mean, we're so inundated with American news and everything else.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why, I mean, even in terms of me going out and starting the pod, is that I want to go and, I started off around stuff with Michael Brooks and the idea of cosmopolitanism, but I'm very interested as well in terms of, like kind of the Canadian role in a sort of cosmopolitan sort of worldview, right? If we are moving towards that, what does, Canada as a nation state have to offer compared to everything else that's going on in the world right now? And I mean, that was a question I posed to Matt too, right? Because what I see is so exciting when I hear guys like Pills in terms of, putting out his content, and you now finishing off your PhD, and Matt as a young prof. I mean, you guys are a new cohort of Canadian intellectuals that are moving out there and rattling and shaking things off. Just the way Ben Burgess is, like I look at Ben and he's, a bit of a, he's got his crew down in the US, but in Canada, all of a sudden we're seeing this new sort of wrestling with ideas or history of ideas and trying to figure out, like, well, what kind of philosophy or political theory would go out and address some of these malaises. So I'm excited. I'm just like that. That's why, like, as a bit of an older Gen X, where I felt that like my generation was a bit of a failure, like, because we're just overshadowed by boomers. To see you guys really go out there and shake things up in a certain way. I mean, Bernie was not a win in terms of millennial socialism, but that there's a new wave of leftism that is emerging there, and there's a lot of creative thinking that's happening. So I'm super pumped.
Yeah, totally. I was gonna
see what you guys are gonna do next.
No, totally, man. I appreciate that a lot. I realized I didn't really like answer your question either about what I think Canada has to offer, on the world stage, or like philosophically, or like, is there, when I was at Ryerson, there was a professor, she's now retired, Betty Trott. And she was interested in Canadian philosophy. She was trying to like identify like what is a Canadian, and she would, and it was not, she's kind of like old school conservative a little bit. And, so she wasn't locating it necessarily in like indigenous stuff, right? Like she was thinking about it from like kind of, and she actually connected a lot like Hegel, and I think maybe like is John Watson Canadian, or maybe he's someone else. I forget. She used to name. Is he Canadian?
Yeah, he's Canadian as well.
Yeah, that was
part
her guy.
Of the British idealism.
Exactly. Yeah. So she always identified it with John Watson and kind of this idealism, this sort of like Hegelian pragmatism, I guess she thought was like a way of identifying like Canada's choices, Canada's paths. And I think there's something to that. I think Canada is much more a country of compromise when compared to the United States. I think the United States is a country of extremes. It's a country of, the best and the worst, right? The best examples of human achievement and the worst examples of misery and failure and inequality. And I think you see it even with their university system, right? It's like they've got the best universities in the world, but it's like, and then Canada is just like compromise, pragmatic. It's like, well, let's just make the universities like, public, and they're all basically the same, right? Like, yeah, sure, like the U of T and McGill are like better, but like, are they? Like I feel like any university like in Canada has like the same experience, I think, like roughly. Whereas like in the States, there really is like a difference. Like, you go to like a shitty state school versus like one of the, top 10 or top 20. I mean, it's like a huge difference in like your employability. Like in Canada, I don't think it matters. Like going to like U of T or McGill, like for getting a job in like some office, like I don't think they actually care that much.
There's stark differences there in terms of, but and the other thing too is just because, I mean, depending how you go out and interpret Brexit as well. I mean, if because Brexit, I don't know if you can go out and see that as a sort of failure of the European Union, right? Or the beginning of the failure of the European Union. And if that's the case,
I see that as more of a failure of David Cameron than I do of a failure of the European Union. I think he really, that was a big blunder on his part.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the European Union is actually now stronger than ever because of the Ukraine crisis.
Oh shit! Yeah, that's definitely a new factor there in there.
But so I think that's
before Brexit, all of a sudden I was thinking maybe that Canada will go and be viewed or interpreted quite differently because we are still a nation state. I mean, we're still a country in a certain sense, right? And it is wrestling with not deep issues, but a deep sort of multiculturalism, and what does that actually go out and look like? So
I think we also choose to deal with it with this kind of pragmatism. I think, like, and even I was going to say too, like, even with our the way our constitution works, I mean, it's criticized a lot for having the notwithstanding clause, if you know what that is, right? Where like, provinces can pass laws that actually violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in the Constitution, but as long as they invoke the notwithstanding clause, I think it's like a trigger. It's like reviewed every 3 years, right? They can basically violate the the Constitution, and Quebec's been doing that for their language laws, the whole time, right? So that they can have like French only, because the charter clearly says that you have a right to services in both English and French, and Quebec violates that by saying we're only going to offer certain things in French.
Yeah,
and I think that's fine.
They've been playing chicken with it too, right? They know.
But I think that's. But in some ways, like I feel like this is, to me, such an exemplification of Canadian compromise. It's like okay, like yeah, we'll have this Charter of Rights and Freedoms that's like pretty robust, but maybe you can violate it every once in a while. Like that's so different than like this American attitude of like this sacred Constitution, right? That shall never be violated. Or some people think it's like really dangerous and bad that we have this notwithstanding clause, and yeah, like it's true that Doug Ford almost was thinking about invoking the notwithstanding clause. But I do think that there are political consequences for doing something like that. And I think, I've been having some conversations on Twitter with people about checks and balances, right? And like the fact that in the States, you can't get anything done because you need 60 senators and people are, and I think that like in Canada, it's so different because it's like, if you win all the seats, you just get to do whatever you want pretty much. Right. And then, but then like the check on that is that next time someone else might get voted in and they can undo everything. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that that's like a good way of managing a country, because then you get to see how those policies unfold. And then the voters can kind of decide whether or not they like it. And then they can vote based on that, rather than a system where like nothing gets done and then everyone's blaming the other side for nothing getting done. So I guess all that to say, like, I think our system like works in like a pragmatically good way, but I would also say it's like, it's not the best, right? I think a lot of European countries are better than us when it comes to at least like social safety nets and all that stuff. We're kind of, like I said, I feel like we're just such a compromise between like European like ways of doing things that make sense, right? Like having a single payer healthcare system, but then because like we got America right there, it's like I feel like we're almost like this kind of in between place where we're like, well, those things make sense. We have to be competitive with the States, but we want to make sure that we have services for our citizens, and we'll do it this way. And so it's more boring, but I think like but more stable, and I think like just like more sensible. It's just a sensible, pragmatic place that is doing its best to have everyone get along. And that's kind of how I see Canada, as just like a sensible, pragmatic place.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, a lot of the people just when they think about Canada, it's just some boring place. That's usually their go-to. It's like there's nothing exciting in a certain way. But I mean, like when I was talking to Ben, I was laughing because
Montreal's pretty exciting.
Oh, well, we have the best party scene.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're going to come party, come to Montreal. It rocks. Yeah. But when I was talking to Ben, I mean, the joke is that, like we exported our best, right? We're sending Jordan Peterson down to the US. And I was just like, oh, you can keep him along.
Yeah, you can you could keep Gavin McInnes. You could keep what's her name? Lauren Southern. You could keep. Why do we produce all these weird reactionaries who move to the States? It's so strange.
Yeah. No, and we export them. I mean, they take them. I mean, it's been a strange mix of no, that part is no, I mean, and that's why, I mean, like in terms of my pod and unpacking some of this stuff, and also I guess seeing what you guys are doing, and there's some other people as well that are, they're talking a lot more of uniting in terms of like Canadian podcasts to go out and form some sort of not unified front, but to take on basically the onslaught of American media that just floods our airwaves, right? And that if we can, to go out and just highlight and and say and show the best ones. I mean, in the Pill Pod and what you guys have been doing. I mean, amazing. Probably one of the better philosophy pods out there that that goes under the radar, possibly as being American, but if you listen to it carefully, we know.
Yeah, it comes up. Some people aren't sure. But I think we mentioned it, I think, in often enough. I was going to say, do you ever talk to Gordon Caddick and his Darts and Letters podcast? He's
that's another one.
Another Canadian one,
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've hung out with him a couple times because he lives in Toronto. He's a great guy. I would recommend getting in touch with him. You should have him on. He's and have a listen to some of his stuff because he's a super nice, interesting guy. And like, I think another Canadian, I think like another one of those, I guess, Canadian podcasts that's trying to be sort of philosophical and political. So yeah, I would definitely recommend him. You made me think of him because you said when you mentioned, like Canadian podcasts kind of uniting or whatever, like that's one of his things too. He was like, we should, well, at least in Toronto, I remember he was like, we should all, get this, like, Toronto leftist collective. He wants to like start something like that. And I was like, and that maybe it's more for like drinking beers and stuff with the other, but like in general, I think he does have that sort of attitude that, Canadian podcasters, should, especially like when it comes to like left of center politics and philosophy, should have each other's back, I guess, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah. No, and it's cool to see just grad students doing that as well, picking up the medium and advancing their own work and developing their own ideas, and just the books too, man. I mean, great book that you guys pumped out, and I hope you guys keep pumping them out too. And if I can, I'll get the word about them, push it out.
It doesn't matter. These books, people shouldn't be buying these academic books. They're like hundreds of dollars, way too expensive. Just get it from your library.
Yeah, for sure. But still, I mean, you don't want it to just linger on the shelf there and not get noticed for whatnot. But
I don't think Matt gets any money from book sales.
The royalties.
Academic publishers are sharks when it comes to when it comes to profits and stuff like that. It's
even
crazy.
Just the journals. It's
brutal. The journals are crazy. Yeah, it's an absurd amount of it's an absurd profit.
Yeah,
profit engine.
Well, rock on, man. Well, listen, I really appreciate your time. And I'll probably circle back around when you guys keep on doing some new stuff. I mean, we didn't even get to go in touch about some of your articles. We just touched just a bit in terms of the intro that you wrote, but you've written for Arrow, Jacobin now too. Did you write for Marion West too, or it was just mostly?
Yeah, I wrote for Marion West. Okay. I wrote one. I think I wrote one thing. I mean, I haven't done those. I've only done like 4, I think, or maybe 5. I can't remember. Yeah, just like when things came to me, but I'm not like Matt. I for me, it's like a painful birthing process to write for me. It's not like Matt can just like spit them out like he's peeing. For me, it's like for me, writing is like an arduous process.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I was thinking lately about a couple of things where I was like, maybe I should write, but also got to finish the dissertation, trying to balance everything out. But I always enjoyed, I really like writing for those mediums because of the instant feedback you get from like the comments section. It's like fun to interact with people because they'll read it, and so different than like academic writing and academic publications because the feedback you're getting. I think my first peer-reviewed article, like it's from 2019. And it was just maybe like a couple months ago where like I saw the first citations where people were citing it in like other articles, right? So it's just such slow feedback loops where it's like it's been 2 years, 3 years since then, and then finally I'm seeing some people like comment about it, right?
No, and so I mean that's another aspect too that I've really enjoyed about your guys' podcast and public sort of discussions as grad students and post grads and PhD students now and stuff like that is just, what's going on in higher ed, right? And what's involved there and stuff like that has been so illuminating for me to just even keep my pulse, keep a finger on that pulse and what's going on in our universities and where technology is going out and innovating some of this as well. So, no, you guys are trailblazing that one along pretty cool in a very cool way. I mean, Pills I don't know if he has any, ambitions to possibly land up in higher, some sort of university or college type stuff. But I mean, the way he's moving ahead, it's super creative for him to go out and weave in his studies in terms of that kind of a medium. It's amazing to watch.
Yeah, totally. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think he occasionally will apply for a job if it comes up, but I don't think he really likes the I guess the sort of like academic game of like publishing and like it's a very specific kind of game you have to play if you want to go into academia, which I'm not sure. He's an excellent educator though, right? Like you can tell from his videos that he's like very good at putting together like lessons and lectures. So I think he enjoys the teaching side of it, but I don't think he enjoys the really like politics and publishing side of academia.
Yeah. No,
but
and
yeah,
I
I mean,
mean,
I think he's applied for like a few jobs here and there, but I think he really is, you know, putting all his energy onto the kind of content creation.
well, either way, and I loved it. I mean, keep up the great work. And again, man, I really appreciate the time.